Hi everyone. So today we will talk about what is an association rule. So the first question we want to answer is that what is an association rule exactly? For example, the goal of association rule is to find the patterns where which items that will appear together. For example, another way we can ask this question is that which item they tend to co-occur in transactions. So supermarket sales is one of the classic example that people usually use when they talk about association rule. For example, if we have a customer at a supermarket store and the customer buys a beer, then what other items are they likely to buy together? Right? For example, if we have customer buys one beer, then which other items will that customer also buy together with the beer? So we want to find this pattern. And this is called association rule. These rules are very helpful because they can help the stores to plan their layouts, their promotion plan, and also plan the recommendations for their customers. This can help them to increase their sales and also increase their profits. So in our class, we will focus on supermarket model. So in the supermarket application here, we need to define three terms that will be useful. For example, the first term we want to define is called item. Item is just the products that you can see from the shelf. For example, I can buy a pack of chips. I can buy a bottle of beer. I can buy a bag of diapers. Those are items. Those are the individual products of the shelves. So this is the product customer can buy. For example, as we say, chips, beer, and diaper. And then another term we want to define is called transaction, or in other words, we can also call this baskets. For example, when you go to the checkout, you just pick out all the items you want, you go to the checkouts. The items you buy, you make the payment at the checkout is called a transaction. That will be a set of items that you bought together. So we call this transaction. This is just a set of the item that you can buy, the customer buy at the checkout counter. Then the next term we want to define is called data set. So data set, you can think of that this is just the set of all transactions in the store, right? Because you can have many customers and all of the customers, they can make several transactions at your store. All these transaction data, they are together, they are collected together and form a huge data set. So that's the idea. So another term we want to define is called item set. Item set is just a set of items. For example, you say we have a transaction, the customer just buys some things at a checkout, and we have one transaction. Now, in this transaction, you can have multiple items. At the same time, you can also have multiple item sets. So, for example, let's say we have this one transaction here. The customer buys two bags of chips, one bottle of beer. That's one transaction. So, how many item set can we have in this transaction? So, when we talk about item set in a transaction, that will just be any possible combination, any possible set of items. For example, in here, we can have one item set. For example, this item set only contain one item only. So we have chips. So one item set will just contain one chips. And then another one item set will be beer, right? So we also have this beer item in this transaction. Then that is just a combination of one item called one item set. We can also have combination of two items that is called two item set. For example, in here, we can just pick any pair of the item and form a two item set here. In here, we only have two different products, two different items here. We have chips and we have beer. So in here, we can form one two item set where this two item set contain chips and beer. So that's the meaning of the item set. So the next term we need to know is called support counts. So what is support counts? Support counts is just the number of times the item set appear in our data set. The reason why we want to know the number of times the item set will appear is because we want to know what are the item set that will appear frequently in our store. Because we want to develop the association rule from frequent item set because that will make more sense, right? We don't want some random transaction, random item set to contribute to our association rule. We want to know what item set the client, the customer will buy frequently, and we will use those frequent item set to develop our association rule. So to find the frequent item sets, we define that the frequent item set is just the item set where their support count, which is the number of times that appear in the data set, will be greater than or equal to a threshold. Then that will just be frequent item set. As we say, frequent item set that appear in transaction frequently. And because they appear frequently, so that's why we are more interested in those frequent item sets. So for example, how do we find a frequent item set from our transaction? For example, let's say we set the threshold of the support count to be 2. So that means items that appear at least twice. For example, if their support count is at least 2, then we will consider them frequent item sets. So for example, let's say we have one transaction where this customer buy 1 chips, beer, and diapers. Another transaction, the customer buy 2 bags of chips, 1 beer, and another transaction where this customer buy 1 chips. Now the next step is that we want to figure out what are the items set from each transaction. Now for the first transaction, we can figure out 3 one item set. That is chips, beer, and diapers, right? That's the one item set that we can get from the first transaction. Now we can try to identify 2 item set where this set will contain a pair of different items. So that will be the 2 item set that we can get from the first transaction. We can have chips and beer, which is this one, and then we can also have chips and diaper. So chips and diaper, that is the second 2 item set that we can identify. Then we can have beer and diapers. That is the third 2 item set that we can identify. So those are all the 2 item set that we can get from the first transaction. Then lastly, because this transaction contains 3 different products, so we can also identify 3 item set from this transaction. So those are all the item set that we can identify from the first transaction. Now we are just going to do the same thing for the second transaction. First of all, identify the 1 item set. We have chips, we have beers, and then let's identify 2 item sets. So we have chips and beer, so we have chips and beer. And we don't have 3 item sets from the second transaction because we only have 2 different products here. So that's all item set that we can find from the second transaction. Then we repeat the same thing for the third transaction, figure out what are the items that do we have here. We only have 1 product, so we only have 1 item set from the third transaction. Now we figure out the transaction, we figure out the item set for each of the transaction. Now we can start counting the number of times the item sets appear in this transaction. And then we can get their support counts, and then we can figure out which are frequent item sets. So for example, let's do the counting here. First of all, we the 1 item set where we have 1 chips appear 3 times across the transaction, right? It appears 1 time from the first transaction, another time in the second transaction, and another time in the third transaction. So the 1 item set, the chips appear 3 times. Now we do the same thing. We count the number of times the 1 item set, the beer appear, how many times it appears. So it appears 1 time from the first transaction, 2 times, another time from the second transaction. So a total of 2 times. Do the same thing for the diaper. We have the diaper appears once in the first transaction and only in the first transaction. So the 1 item set of the diapers appears only 1 time. Now we just need to repeat the same thing for the 2 item sets here. But for the two item sets, appear twice, so that is 2 times. Another two item set, chips and diapers, appear once in the first transactions, only once. And then another two item set, beer and diapers, also only appears once here in the first transaction. Then lastly, we also need to count how many of the times the three items that appear, also only once from the first transaction, so only once. Now we have the support counts of each item set. Now we can compare the support counts of the item sets with the threshold to figure out which are the frequent item sets. So if you can recall that, we say that our threshold will be how many support counts? Will be 2, right? So any item sets that has at least support count 2, we will consider them frequent item sets. So now let's remove those infrequent, that is non-frequent item sets. So we will remove the diaper because it's only 1. And then we will remove the 3 item set because only 1. We will remove chips and diaper because only 1. Then we will remove chips, beer and diapers as well because it's only 1. Now, the remaining 3, 1 item set of chips, 1 item set of beer, 2 item set of chips and beer, they are the frequent item set here because they appear at least twice among the transaction. Their support counts, it is at least 2. Okay, so now we know the frequent item sets. So now, given the 3 frequent item sets, we can try to develop our association rules. So these are the frequent item sets appear frequently. Now we can use them to generate association rules here. Now notice that for these two are the one item set, right? They only contain one item in a set. So we cannot generate any association rule from them because there's only one item in each set. There's no association at all. So we can just ignore the one item set here. Then we can just focus on the frequent 2 item set because they contain at least 2 items. So we can have the association rule where, for example, let's say we can say if the customer buys 1 chips, they may also buy 1 beer, right? Because chips and beer appear together. Now, similar idea, if the customer buy 1 beer, it's also likely they may buy chips as well because beer and chips appear together. So those are the 2 association rules that we can get from the 2 item frequent sets. So that's the main idea. Now we have these 2 association rules, but now we want to ask one question. Are these 2 association rules, are they equally important? Right? Because although we can get these 2 rules from the same frequent item set, but they can be different. They can have different importance. So let's see. If we want to know how important are these 2 rules, we need to introduce another concept called confidence. So confidence just tells us how often do we see B when A appears. So you can see from the rules, the conditions difference. These 2 rules, they tell us different things. The first rule here is saying that if we see the customer buy chips, how likely the customer will also buy beer. And for the second rule is the difference. If the customer first buy a beer, then how likely the customer will buy chips, right? So those are different rules because they have different conditions. So confidence is trying to tell us how often do we see B. This is the results. If A already appears, that's the condition, right? If we see this condition, how likely we will see the results. So formally, to calculate the confidence for A, if we see A, then how often do we also see B? The confidence, the formula for the confidence will be the support counts of A and B divided by the support count of A. So later I will show you one example, then you will see how to calculate that. Now, first, just stick to the formula and definition. This is also equivalent to the conditional probability. The confidence of A associates B is the same as the probability of B given A already appears. So that they are equivalent. This is basically just a conditional probability. So let's do the calculation here. Let's say we have this transaction, we have the association rules that we get here. Now we want to calculate the confidence. Let's say we want to calculate the confidence for our first association rule, where if you see the customer buy chips, then how likely the customer will also buy beers. So to calculate that, first of all, you want to know how many times did you see the customer buy beer and chips together? And then you want to know how many times did you see the customer buy chips, right? So if you recall the frequent item set here, we have 3 times. The customer buy chips 3 times, where only 2 of them, they also buy beer, right? So that means the confidence for when you see the chips and then the customer, how likely they will buy beer will be 2/3. Because that is the data you can see from the item set, right? From 3 times the customer buy chips, you only see 2 times they also buy beer. So the probability that the customer buy chips and then buy beer will be 2/3. That's the confidence here. Now, similarly, if you want to figure out the confidence for if you see the customer buy beer, then how likely they will also buy chips. For the same idea, first of all, you want to know how many times the customer buy chips and beer together. And then you also want to know how many times the customer buy beer. So from this transaction and the item set, you see that the customer buy beers 2 times, where all of these 2 times they also buy chips. So that means the confidence for when you see the customer buy beer, how likely they will also buy chips will be 2/2. So that will be 1. So that will be the confidence. So that means if you, in our data, if you see the customer buy beer, then it's almost 100% that the customer will also buy chips. So that will be the confidence for the second association rule. So if you look at here, we can answer the question, are these association rules equally important, right? So the answer is no, because if you calculate the confidence, you can see that the confidence for the first rule is only 2/3, right? But the confidence for the second rule is 1. So this rule, we have more confidence. That means if we see the customer buy beer, we are more confident that the customer will also buy chips. So that's the confidence. So in summary, not all association rules are equal. Even if you can get several association rules from the same set of frequent item sets, but their confidence could be different because the conditional probability can also be different. That's the main idea. Thank you.